Hello and welcome to the She Reads Romance Books podcast, the ultimate show for romance book lovers looking for the best books worth reading. I'm your host, Leslie Murphy, and in each short episode, I share my favorite book list of recommendations so you know exactly what to add to your must-read list. Join me as I explore the romance genre and have fun collecting book boyfriends along the way, because life is better with a love story. Hey readers, thanks for joining me today. In this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast, I'm talking about a subcategory of romance that I haven't really mentioned much on the podcast yet, even though it is one of my favorites to read, and that is historical romance. I'm going to be talking a bit about historical romance and sharing some of my favorite historical romance books of all time. But before I do, I want to tell you about a steamy contemporary romance that releases tomorrow that you're definitely going to want to add to your TBR list, and that is The Professor by New York Times bestselling author Skye Warren. This is the first book in a brand new trilogy coming out from Warren, and it is a forbidden student professor ex-boyfriend's dad romance, and it sounds so good with all the various, tropes and micro tropes that's packed in its pages. So just listen to the summary real quick. One night only with a handsome stranger, older, alluring, savage, dominant, no last names or expectations, just raw, carnal, filthy pleasure. I never thought I would see him again until the first day of class. He's my new professor and my ex-boyfriend's father. He has a world of secrets in his eyes and the weight of the world on his shoulders. I should stay away from him, but the more I try, the more consumed he gets. His possessiveness is rivaled only by his secretive nature. He knows everything about me, but mystery surrounds him. Shadows threaten the entire university and our forbidden love. Talk about steaminess, right, people? So, as I said, this book has it all. It's forbidden romance. There's humiliation kink, secret sex society, one night stand, hand necklace, ex-boyfriend's father, and even more if you can believe it. That's Skye Warren's The Professor, which is out tomorrow, so check it out. But back to historical romance. When I first put my book list of best historical romance novels together, I actually had to, or wanted to, look up the definition of historical romance, right? Because as time keeps moving, I wanted to know what, does the profession or, authors really consider to be historical, right? So if you're curious like me and want to know, a historical romance novel is actually a book with a storyline that takes place before 1950. And it, of course, has a central love story that ends in a happy ending. Now, before 1950 leaves you a wide range of time periods and parts of the world, right, to explore in a historical romance novel. So there's lots of variety to choose from depending on your interest in, historical time periods. And that's honestly one of the best reasons that I always say that why I love the romance genre, because of its variety. And that's definitely the case when it comes to historical romance. Now, I personally love that historical romance novels often give you this deep dive into the history of the era or time period that the book is set in. So you kind of feel like you're, transported back in time, or at least with the really, really good authors. And those really good authors also often write such descriptive prose that you feel as though you're interacting with the book's characters yourself and you're reading along with. And I just love that about a historical romance. So part of the appeal for me with historical romance novels is just the almost like sneaking around that kind of happens between characters. The hidden glances or the slightest of touches that evoke such passion and intimacy among the heroes and heroines of these stories. It's just, the littlest bit goes really a long way, I would say, in historical romance. I just read a historical romance where the heroines
unthinkingly touches the hero's thigh. Not even really his upper thigh, just like by his knee, his thigh. And it's like the most sexually charged moment for them, right? Because they're not even really a couple. They're actually like pretending to be husband and wife after having just like met maybe like 12 hours prior. And again, it's just this charged moment when she happens to like put her hand on her thigh. And again, it's just from touching, right? So often, I think the intimacy or sexual tension is not really thrown in your face in historical romance books, but just stews, under the surface. And I love that. And that's not to say, right, that historical romance novels can't also be high on the steaminess level, which many are as well. And I actually have 2 book lists that you might be interested in if you like books on the steamier side. I have a list of the best erotic historical romance books and the best steamy historical romance books up on She Reads Romance Books, so you can check those out. But another reason I have to say that I love historical romance books are for the varied, I'd say, historical romance heroes. I am equally a fan of the Rakes and the Rogues as much as the Dukes and the Lords, though I do say I have a real weakness for the Scottish Highlanders if I had to pick. But if we are talking about historical romance, I think we have to be a little bit real. People still do have a real prejudice, I think, against romance books in general, and many do of historical romances as well. Thinking, that they're all just these bodice rippers or simply full of women in corsets, falling at the knees of men among patriarchal society. And I personally think, at least nowadays, this is far from the truth, at least from where my favorite historical romance authors are concerned. I actually find that historical romance novels often showcase the strongest of women who are perhaps, fighting uphill battles, but fighting them, nonetheless, and at the very least showing that they have some spine. I'm not sure if you feel that way now about historical romances, maybe not from this, not so distant past, but I do feel like a lot of authors now are writing these really strong heroines despite the time period that they may be living in. And that just was exciting to me to read about. But I think, of course, the book covers of historical romance novels traditionally haven't probably helped that stigma. I'm probably completely dating myself when I say that Fabio had been a household name as the type of male model who would grace the cover of a historical romance book. His flowing long hair, the chest revealing shirt with the woman draped across his arm, may have been the standard book cover, but things I think are definitely changing where that is concerned. These days, my favorite historical romance covers have the heroine gracing the cover in like these beautiful gowns, or many even now have, received a modern upgrade in terms of either a real looking picture, like the Bridgerton books, I think have now changed their covers too. And of course, many are now just going for the graphic cover, just like contemporary romances. But regardless, historical romance novels shouldn't really be judged and dismissed simply by their book covers. So I would hope that you would kind of agree on that one. Now, maybe you're already a fan of historical romance books, but if you're not, either way, in this rest of this episode, I'm going to share my top 5 historical romance books that I think are the best books of all time that you absolutely must read if you love historical romance, or if you're just kind of curious about it and want to check it out. I obviously love more than 5. It was hard to pick these 5, but as I said, you can go jump over to shereadsromancebooks.com and find my entire list of best historical romance novels of all time, because I definitely have more there. But I'm sticking to 5 today in this episode. So the first book, and honestly, I think the very first historical romance book that I read, I can't be 100% on this, but I think it is, and that is Kingdom of Dreams by Judith McNaught. If you've been following me at all at She Reads Romance Books, you know that Paradise by Judith McNaught is my favorite romance book and the one that really hooked me on the genre. It's a contemporary romance, but after reading it, I dove into Judith's entire book catalog, particularly because those were the romance books, honestly, on my mom's bookshelf, in addition to all her Nora Roberts books that she had. So picking up Kingdom of Dreams, I was just captivated from this book from the very start. I was just in awe of being swept back in time to when dukes held the power and women had no power whatsoever. And it takes place in the 1400s, near the border of England and Scotland, when both countries are at war. And the heroine of the story is Jennifer Merrick, a Scottish girl who's just 17. She, at the time, has been living in a convent for the last 2 years, having been sent there by her father because she refused to marry a much older man. But now her father wants her to marry a chieftain of an opposing clan, but this guy, too, is another much older man. But Jennifer reluctantly agrees because she wants to earn back some favor in her father's eyes. But before she can even marry the dude, she is abducted by the English warrior Royce Westmoreland, Duke of Claymore. He is known as the Wolf because of his ruthlessness and his cruelty. And being abducted by him, just then sparks this push-pull between the dominant, arrogant alpha male and his young yet spirited girl who just won't give in to him, despite, being kidnapped by him. I think I was probably a teenager when I read this, so I was instantly hooked trying to imagine this, 17-year-old being abducted and taken by an enemy, and yet how she soon falls for him, nonetheless. Talk about some major Stockholm syndrome, but you can believe it reading the story because their chemistry was just so obvious and her family was just the worst. So you want so much more for her in this story. I would just imagine her, being tucked away in her tent, just waiting to see what Westmoreland would do. And the anticipation just kept you kind of like turning page after page, like what's going to happen. I love a great enemies to lovers story, and this one was perfection. I cannot recommend it enough. A Kingdom of Dreams by Judith McNaught. Add that one to your TBR list right now if you haven't read it. My next favorite historical romance book is An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn, which is book 3 in the Bridgerton series. Though I honestly love all the Bridgerton books. The first one, The Duke and I, was a fabulous, fake dating romance. The Viscount Who Loved Me was another great enemies to lovers romance. I also enjoyed Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is a friends to lovers romance, and Francesca's story in When He Was Wicked was awesome when Michael finally gets the girl he had fallen for before she weds another. You also have, Eloise's story and Hyacinth and Gregory's. The entire Bridgerton series is awesome, in no doubt why they made the TV series, which is also fabulous. But my favorite, I would say, is An Offer from a Gentleman, and one that I really think more people need to read now, especially if you've only watched the Bridgerton TV series, because they've changed Benedict for the TV series, and I don't know. Definitely like him better in the book, and they're kind of skipping over this book for the TV series, moving right into Romancing Mr. Bridgerton for season 3, which is going to come up here soon in May. And it makes sense, honestly, if you've watched the show, like that they, have been building up Colin and Penelope's story. But I so loved Benedict in the book series, and this Cinderella-esque romance that it is one of my favorite romance books of all time. I'm just going to read the official book blurb for it because whoever wrote it really nailed the Cinderella references, I think. So here it goes. Sophie Beckett never dreamed she'd be able to sneak into Lady Bridgerton's famed masquerade ball, or that Prince Charming would be waiting there for her. Though the daughter of an earl, Sophie has been relegated to the role of servant by her disdainful stepmother. But now, spinning in the strong arms of the debonair and devastatingly handsome Benedict Bridgerton, she feels like royalty. Alas, she knows all enchantments must end when the clock strikes midnight. Who was that extraordinary woman? Ever since that magical night, a radiant vision in silver has blinded Benedict to the attractions of any other, except perhaps this alluring and oddly familiar beauty dressed in housemaid's garbs when he feels compelled to rescue her from a disagreeable situation. He has sworn to find and wed his mystery miss, but this breathtaking maid makes him weak with wanting her. Yet if he offers his heart, will Benedict sacrifice his only chance for a fairy tale love? Oh my gosh, if you couldn't tell, Benedict falls for this mysterious woman at a masquerade ball who is Sophie, who then is the housemaid that he later is also falling for. But hello, you've fallen for the same woman, Benedict, but he doesn't know it, and he doesn't want to give up that spark that he felt with this mysterious woman, even though he feels the similar spark with Sophie. Plus, she sort of presents another problem that she's not in his same, social strata or social station. She is the bastard child of an earl and is serving as a maid to her awful stepmother when Benedict rescues her from that situation. So very Cinderella-like. But even if you don't like retellings in that way, I just loved these two characters. This historical romance is just so well written, as are all of Julia Quinn's books. So the story just flows and you are, utterly captivated, I think, reading throughout this whole book. Given their differences in social status, there is so much unsaid in their conversations, but that is communicated, in looks and passings by, and it's just so good. Okay, should I move on from Bridgerton, which is definitely a must-read series? The next historical romance that I devoured is Outlander by Diana Gabaldon. I first came to this story watching the first episode of the TV series on Starz and immediately had to pick up the book and read it before watching any more episodes. And the rest, as they say, is history when it comes to me devouring the entire series. Now, I know it's not really, or she never really says it's a romance. It's more like historical fiction, but it's romance, people. I mean, it's the central love story of Jamie and Claire. It's just phenomenal. But I honestly feel like I need to add up the total number of pages in all 9 books so far because it's freaking a lot. These books are thick, people. I'm talking like 800, thousands of pages, but they are worth every moment that you get with Jamie and Claire Fraser. So if you're not familiar with the story of Outlander, it sweeps you back in time to the Scottish Highlands first in 1945. Claire Randall, a former British combat nurse, is just back from the war and reunited with her husband Frank on a second honeymoon when she walks through a standing stone in one of the ancient circles that dot the British Isles. Suddenly, she is a Sassenach, or an outlander, in a Scotland torn by war and raiding clans in the year of 1743. So, recognizing that she is no longer in her own time period, she has no choice but to take up with a group of clansmen, including one young warrior, Jamie Fraser. But Claire soon finds herself not only trying to stay alive and get back to her time, but is now torn between 2 very different men and 2 different lives. So I would say there are really 2 reasons for me, that I would say, to read Outlander. One, the first is for the amazing history you get in each of these novels, whether it be about the Scottish clans, the Jacobite Rebellion, or the American Revolution. The amount of research, I'm telling you, that Diana does for these books, for the amount of detail that she includes in her stories, it's just astounding. I mean, follow her on Facebook because she kind of talks about that every now and then. She's just amazing, but I'm sure it's a ton of work, which is why it takes years for the next book to come out. But the history, again, that she conveys, it's just and she conveys it in such a captivating way to learn a bit of that history that's wrapped up in the story, about the Fraser family. Which brings me to the second reason why you need to read Outlander and the entire series, which is for that central love story between Jamie and Claire. Jamie is hands down, one of my all-time favorite book boyfriends, and I honestly don't think anyone will ever budge him from that mantle. Let's be real. But honestly, it's their relationship together, right? He supports Claire even when he thought, gosh, that she was a witch, or, she pursues her studies to be a doctor, even back in that time when that wasn't accepted for a woman. But he supports her, they communicate, they fuck, they are just the best example of soulmates, and I love them so much. I jokingly say, that given what transpires in the books, we never really see them, though, together as parents of small kids. So I'd really like to see how their relationship would look with that dynamic, because throwing small kids in a relationship, that's tough, people, right? But that aside, Diana has written the most iconic characters and love story in these two people and characters. And I'm going to be so sad once book 10 comes out, bringing the series to an end, which she said it will with book 10. But it's coming. But as I said, it takes her years. So I think you have plenty of time to start digging into all 9 books if you haven't already, because it's so worth it. Okay, my next favorite historical romance book might not be on many people's radar unless you've been following me for a while, and that is Truce by R.L. Mathewson. It, too, is one of my all-time favorite romance books, and one that I've reread many, many times because I just love it so much. This historical romance novel is part of her Neighbor from Hell series, of which the rest of the books are contemporary novels, but she wrote this one as a historical and kind of almost like prequel to the family, and it's fabulous. So our heroine, Elizabeth, is the daughter of an earl and therefore expected to marry well, but all she really wants is a chance to escape and live on her own terms. And thanks to an inheritance her godmother left her years ago, her chance will come with her next birthday. But her hopes of escape, however, are abruptly end when Robert Bradford, her childhood nemesis that she hasn't seen since they were children, comes back into her life and does everything within his power to make her pay for their past. Now, let me just say that even if you aren't a fan of historical romance, but you are a fan of enemies to lovers books, which I know many of you are going to love this book. It is one of the best hate to love books with the best dialogue and back and forth between characters. It's just to die for. Now, even though Elizabeth and Robert haven't seen each other in years, well, first, they have a really awesome meet cute at the start of the story, which I won't go into and spoil. But when they do sort of recognize each other again, they remember the torment that they wreaked on each other's lives when they were kids. But, kids have this way of viewing things that aren't necessarily true, right? So there's probably this air of miscommunication, and that's just fueled their animosity over these years. But the two can't stand each other, and yet they can't help but also gravitate toward one another, and they just needle each other. But then they end up tied to one another because of a situation, and maybe not hating that as much as they thought they would. One of my favorite scenes occurs in an office where the two have been arguing, of course, but then Robert's brother comes to the door. So Elizabeth, really having no place to go, hides under the desk where Robert is sitting. And so you can imagine what sort of transpires from there. It was awesome and super hot. But the Bradford family, if you're not familiar with this series, they're so unique, right? With a line of males who have this voracious appetite for food, really, and for the love of their women. This story sort of starts that lineage of Bradfords that you'll come to love. So I highly recommend it. If you love books with amazing back and forth banter and pranks and that will have you laughing, as well as swooning, then you need to read Truce. It was phenomenal. Okay, let's see. Lastly, the final favorite historical romance that I cannot wait to gush over and share is What I Did for a Duke by Julie Ann Long. First off, you can't go wrong with any historical romance by Julie Ann Long. I'm currently listening to one of her newer releases, and I'm reminded of how great she just is with her words and her descriptions and creating tension between her characters with just a look or a pause or a well-timed but softly uttered confession. She's just so damn good. But one of my all-time favorites of hers is What I Did for a Duke. And I love it because the romance catches the hero off guard when his initial intentions are focused on revenge against another. So, many rumors circulate about Alexander Moncrief, Duke of Falconbridge, but there is one thing that the Ton knows for certain: only fools dare cross him. And when Ian Eversey does just that, Moncrief knows the perfect revenge. He'll seduce Ian's innocent sister, Genevieve, the only Eversey as yet untouched by scandal. First, he'll capture her heart, and then he'll break it. But everything about Genevieve is unexpected. The passion simmering beneath her cool control, the sharp wit tempered by gentleness. And though Genevieve has heard the whispers about the Duke's dark past and knows she trifles with him at her peril, one kiss tempts her deeper into a world of extraordinary sensuality, until Genevieve is faced with a fateful choice. Is there anything she wouldn't do for a Duke? Oh, gosh, just even reading that book summary makes me want to pick this book up again and read it. It's so awesome. I, for one, can't really blame Alex for wanting revenge since he catches his fiancée in bed with another guy, Ian, right? But to want to ruin his sister's life for it, I mean, come on. You might think, that's a little bit crazy, but it's really, really good. For one, because I actually really liked Alex. Sure, he's this confident man, but he's 39. He's ready to settle down, and he actually changes his tune pretty quickly when it comes to his plans for Genevieve. And Genevieve is just this wonderful heroine. It's like she's still coming into her own, but not so naive or a total wallflower, and someone that Alex wants to see flourish. And I really loved that about him. I can't really go into it more without giving spoilers, I think, but it's one of those books that just hooks you and sticks with you forever. So I say definitely read What I Did for a Duke by Julie Ann Long. Now, as I said, of course, I love more than just 5 historical romance books, but these are my absolute favorites. If you want even more historical romance recommendations, I have so many great book lists up on shereadsromancebooks.com, including the best historical romance books by time period, the best historical romance authors to read right now, the best erotic historical romance books, and the best steamy historical romance books, and also the best Christmas historical romance books when you're ready for those. I seriously love this category of romance, and it's always a delight when I read a new one that just sort of cements its place right on my best of list. Looking over my list of upcoming new romance books for 2024, there are definitely a few coming in the next few months that I hope to read, including a new one from Julie Ann Long. So be sure to check out that page on the blog as well for some more to add to your TBR list. Before I end this episode, just a reminder to join my email list if you're not already on it. I don't inundate you with emails, a ton of emails, but it's the best way to get news about my book list and upcoming podcast episodes, which are going to be featuring some of my favorite romance authors and some special guests. So go to shereadsromancebooks.com/join to sign up today. Thank you so much for listening, and happy reading, because life is better with a love story. That's all for this episode of the She Reads Romance Books podcast. I hope you enjoyed it and found some new books to add to your TBR list. If you did, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast app.
It really helps me reach more romance book lovers like you, and I appreciate your support. If you're a book boyfriend collector like me, then you'll want to join my email list so you never miss a podcast episode or a new book list. Just visit shereadsromancebooks.com/join and sign up today. As a thank you, I'll instantly send you my list of top 10 book boyfriends that will make you swoon. Trust me, you don't want to miss this list. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy reading.